Brazil's far-right former president Jair Bolsonaro plotted to poison his successor, shoot dead the Supreme Court justice investigating him, and reinstall himself as the country's leader following his defeat in the 2022 election. All of that is just a bit of the 272-page indictment that's now been filed by the country's top lawyer. And now, get this, the judge that Bolsonaro allegedly tried to assassinate as the head of the federal investigation into the former president, he is the one who now gets to decide how to proceed with the case. With notably, his first order of business being to decide whether Bolsonaro represents a flight risk and should be held in jail until trial. But also, that judge, he's now being sued by Donald Trump's media company, with that complaint being filed just hours after the indictment against Bolsonaro. And with that, a possible very key thing is that is happening just 1 month after Bolsonaro explicitly called on Trump to take action against the judge in an interview with the New York Times, which is why you have places like the Times now suggesting the lawsuit appeared to represent an astonishing effort by Mr. Trump to pressure a foreign judge as he weighed the fate of a fellow right-wing leader who, like him, was indicted on charges that he tried to overturn his election laws. And so with that, to try to make sense of all this, we should go back to that election. Because in 2022, Brazil's current president, Lula, defeated Bolsonaro, and Bolsonaro refused to concede defeat and baselessly claimed that the only way he could have actually lost was a result of election fraud. But then, a few months later, thousands of his supporters attacking the country's presidential palace, Supreme Court building, and House of Congress. And of course, all of that may sound familiar to anyone in the US. That is kind of where the similarities end. Because in June of 2023, the country's top electoral court ruled that Bolsonaro abused his power and cast unfounded doubts on the country's electronic voting system, and they banned him from running for office until 2030. Then, in November of last year, the country's federal police formally accused Bolsonaro of attempting a coup, and finally this week, you had those charges being brought by the country's prosecutor general, revealing not only those new allegations about the plan to assassinate Lula and the judge, but adding the members of the criminal organization structured a plan at the presidential palace to attack institutions aiming to bring down the system of powers and the democratic order, which received the sinister name of Green and Yellow Dagger, and saying in no uncertain terms the plan was conceived and taken to the knowledge of the president, and he agreed to it. And so with that, assuming the Supreme Court accepts the charges, Bolsonaro will stand trial and reportedly face up to 20 years in prison if convicted. And considering the power that one Supreme Court justice in particular has over the case, it's why you have people wondering whether the Trump lawsuit is really a coincidence. Right? And so to dive into that part, let's start by saying that the case is being brought by the Trump Media and Technology Group, which is majority owned by Donald Trump and is the company behind his social media network, Truth Social. But also, notably, right, Truth Social, it relies on fellow right-wing platform Rumble for cloud hosting, video streaming, and other back-end services. And so with that, Rumble is also named as a plaintiff in the lawsuit. And in fact, the entire case is mostly based around the fact that the judge ordered Rumble to remove the accounts of prominent supporters of Bolsonaro. Right, Truth Social hasn't actually been subject to the judge's order at this point, but since the company is partly dependent on Rumble's technology, it says it risks, quote, operational challenges in the United States as a result. And all of this is, even though this is a case against a Brazilian judge, it's being filed in the US on the basis of US law. But the company is specifically claiming the gag orders demand that Rumble, from its Florida-based headquarters and without any Brazil operations, enforce a universal ban on the targeted accounts, imposing a total blackout that extends even to US users. And so they're accusing the judge of censoring what they said is legitimate political discourse in the United States and saying they're undermining fundamental constitutional protections enshrined in the First Amendment. And so for now, we're gonna have to wait to see, how or whether the lawsuit will affect the state of play in Brazil. But notably, until now, right, this judge, he hasn't caved, even with his life on the line. Because in addition to the alleged assassination plot, a Bolsonaro supporter tried to bomb the Supreme Court, but that has not stopped him from ordering the arrest of Bolsonaro's allies and the confiscation of his passport. And similarly, he hasn't bowed to criticism about his decision to suspend hundreds of social media accounts belonging to Bolsonaro supporters, even from the world's richest man. Right, you may remember this, but last April, Elon Musk announced that he'd be lifting restrictions against accounts banned under the judge's authority. And after a months-long feud culminating in Brazil's telecom agency blocking access to X across the entire country, Musk backed down and complied with the judge's demands. Now, with all that said, one thing to note is, there is a very real debate in Brazil about whether this judge has gone too far at times. But for now, we're gonna have to wait to see how things play out. And in the meantime, of course, I'd love to know your thoughts here, whether it be about the allegations and charges against Bolsonaro or the Trump lawsuit of it all. Hey, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this clip from the full Philip DeFranco show. And also, a big thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring our Clips channel. Turn your passion into profit over at squarespace.com/Phil or use the QR code. Because whether you're launching a business or a lucrative side hustle, your website is your digital business card. It's the only space where you control the story, no algorithms or distractions. And with Squarespace, it's so easy because they got a ton of stunning professional templates with drag and drop editing that makes site design incredibly simple, no coding required. So get started for free at squarespace.com/Phil or scan the QR code on screen and use code Phil for 10% off when ready to launch. Squarespace.com/Phil.